The radio crackled. Static. Then silence. Lieutenant Volkov stared at the RT-45 transmitter. Another reconnaissance unit had gone dark. The third this week. Moscow's rigid communication doctrine demanded radio contact every 6 hours. Miss a check-in, you're presumed dead. Simple as that. But the Germans weren't stupid. They'd figured out the pattern. Every Soviet reconnaissance team followed the same script. Radio check at 0600. Position report at 1200. Supply status at 1800. Final report at midnight. The Wehrmacht's intelligence unit sat listening, triangulating, plotting coordinates. When dawn came, the Stukas would find their targets. Russian radio traffic was vulnerable because of its rigid operating procedures. A captured Soviet signal officer had spelled it out clearly under interrogation. The Germans knew exactly when to listen. They knew exactly where to strike. Volkov's detachment had orders. Standard reconnaissance mission deep behind German lines. Locate enemy. Positions. Report strength assessments. Maintain radio schedule. Follow protocol. But protocols were getting good men killed. Senior Sergeant Mikhailov entered the bunker. His face was granite. His eyes were dead. 3 tours on the Eastern Front had carved out everything soft in him. Sir, the men are ready. Volkov looked at his radio operator. Private Kozlov, 19 years old, still believing that headquarters knew what they were doing. The boy's fingers hovered over the radio keys like a pianist waiting for his cue. Kozlov, Volkov said quietly, step outside. The boy looked confused, but obeyed. Volkov waited until his footsteps faded. Mikhailov, how many good men have we lost following Moscow's radio procedures? Too many, sir. The Germans know our schedule. They know our protocols. They're hunting us with our own radios. Mikhailov nodded. He'd seen the pattern too. Good reconnaissance teams going out, radio silence, search parties finding charred equipment, and scattered bones. Volkov made a decision that would save lives and end careers. We're going dark, Sergeant. Complete radio silence. He grabbed the RT-45 by the antenna and hurled it into the muddy water of the nearest shell crater. The identification tags went with it. The mission orders became cigarette paper. They stripped everything that connected them to the Red Army chain of command and buried it in the frozen earth. By dawn, they were ghosts. Moscow's bureaucratic machine operated with mechanical precision. Units reported every 6 hours or faced administrative death. No exceptions. The system couldn't accommodate tactical flexibility or communication failures. Dead or alive was determined by radio schedules, not battlefield reality. The reconnaissance detachment missed their first reporting window. A clerk in Moscow marked them as overdue in red ink. They missed their second window. The status changed to presumed KIA. By the third missed report, official death. Certificates were being processed. Detachment 47B had been filed, sorted, and buried in paperwork. The living dead men moved through German positions with bureaucratic invisibility. Moscow's records showed them as casualties. German intelligence couldn't track units that didn't exist on paper. 50 kilometers behind German lines, the nameless detachment was very much alive. They had thrown their radios into a creek 2 days earlier. Soviet communication doctrine was killing more soldiers than German bullets, and they had chosen to stop dying by procedure. German Obergefreiter Klaus Weber adjusted his headset for the third time in 10 minutes. Static filled his ears. The Soviet reconnaissance frequency that had been chattering for weeks was dead silent. Equipment failure? His supervisor asked. Weber shook his head. The equipment worked fine. He could pick up other Soviet transmissions, artillery coordinates, supply requests, the usual chatter from units following Moscow's rigid communication protocols. But the scouts had vanished from the airwaves entirely. Last transmission was 18 hours ago. Standard check-in at grid reference 447-832. Then nothing. The German intercept station had been tracking Soviet reconnaissance units for months. The procedure never changed. Deep penetration scouts transmitted every 6 hours like clockwork. Direction-finding equipment would triangulate their position within minutes. Artillery or airstrikes followed shortly after. It was systematic, it was completely predictable, but this unit had simply vanished from the airwaves. Maybe we got them already? No, sir. Our patrols found no bodies, no wreckage. That was wrong. Soviet radio discipline might be rigid, but their equipment was reliable. If the unit was alive, they should be transmitting. If they weren't transmitting, they should be dead. Sir? Weber's voice carried a note of unease. What if they're not using radios? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a burning tank. Supply convoys started reporting strange incidents 3 days later. Abandoned camps with fires still burning, but no soldiers. Footprints that led nowhere. Equipment that disappeared without gunshots or explosions. Someone was moving through German rear areas like smoke. Convoy 47 had been moving ammunition to forward positions. Standard route, standard escort. The convoy commander had reported on schedule at 0800. Position update at 1000. Then nothing. The search patrol found the vehicles abandoned on a forest road. No bodies, no blood. No signs of combat. The truck sat empty. Engines still warm, radios tuned to proper frequencies. But the ammunition was gone, all of it. The second convoy vanished 2 days later. Same pattern. Vehicles abandoned, cargo missing, no trace of the attackers. German patrols found no evidence of large-scale Soviet activity, no tank tracks, no artillery positions, no radio intercepts suggesting major unit movements. Whatever was hunting German supply lines was doing so without triggering any conventional detection methods. German sentries began reporting strange sounds at night. Movement in the forest. Footsteps that stopped when you tried to locate them. The whisper of cloth against branches. But no radio chatter, no communication intercepts, no electronic signatures. The Soviets had become invisible. Volkov crouched behind a fallen tree, watching German positions through captured binoculars. His men had shed every piece of identifying equipment. Dog tags, unit patches, personal letters, anything that could link them to the Red Army. They were officially non-existent. The freedom was intoxicating. In the old system, he would have radioed headquarters, requested permission to engage, waited for orders that might come too late or not at all. But dead men didn't need permission. Dead men didn't report to commanding officers. Dead men could ignore every regulation in the Soviet military handbook. Mikhailov, take 3 men around the left flank. Antonov, you're with me on the right. We move in 15 minutes. No radio chatter, no coordination signals. Hand gestures and eye contact. The way soldiers had fought for centuries before electronic warfare complicated everything. The attack was silent, professional. The German guards never knew what hit them. One moment they were sharing cigarettes and complaining about rations. The next, they were unconscious in the snow. The scouts loaded their packs with German ammunition, food, and medical supplies. They left no bodies, no evidence, no calling cards. Just empty storage areas and confused German logistics officers trying to explain how an entire supply depot had been cleaned out without any signs of combat. The smell hit them first at the third abandoned position, rich, thick, meaty. The kind of soup that spoke of civilization and proper kitchens and mothers who cared if you ate enough. Large metal containers of hot lentil and pea soup sat over dying fires. Steam rose into the cold air. The German cooks had prepared enough for 50 men, then abandoned it all when orders came to fall back to secondary positions. Soviet doctrine prohibited consuming enemy supplies, potential contamination, unknown additives, possible poisoning attempts, proper tactical procedure demanded bringing your own rations or going hungry. The dead men ate German soup. Sergeant Mikhailov tasted it first. Rich, well-seasoned, better than anything the Red Army quartermaster had provided in months. He signaled his men forward. 6 soldiers surrounded the German cooking fires and consumed enemy provisions like they owned them. This was tactical heresy. No military manual in any army would recommend living off enemy supplies. It violated basic security protocols. It abandoned logistical independence. It treated warfare like a scavenging operation instead of a professional military engagement. The Scouts thrived on it. German commanders expected civilized warfare, predictable supply chains, self-contained enemy units that carried their own provisions. They planned defensive positions based on Soviet logistical limitations. Cut the supply lines and enemy forces would starve. But soldiers who ate German food couldn't be starved by severed supply lines. The Scouts began targeting German cooking areas exclusively, not weapons caches, not ammunition dumps, not communication centers. They hunted German kitchens like predators stalking prey. Supply convoys reported the same pattern repeatedly. Abandoned rest stops with fires still burning and empty cooking pots. No signs of combat, no equipment stolen, just missing food. The psychological impact was profound. German soldiers expected Soviet forces to attack immediately after discovering abandoned positions. Rapid pursuit was fundamental to Red Army doctrine. Delayed attacks suggested careful planning and patient observation. But Soviet soldiers sitting down to eat German food suggested something much worse. It implied confidence. It suggested that the Red Army considered German positions so non-threatening that their scouts could stop for leisurely meals between tactical movements. One German company commander captured it perfectly in his report. These Russians act like we're catering their operation. German intelligence officers struggled to classify this behavior. Professional armies didn't sustain themselves by scavenging enemy rations. Modern warfare emphasized independent logistics and self-sufficient operations. Armies that depended on capturing enemy supplies were considered primitive and unreliable. But these primitive tactics were proving devastatingly effective. Obergefreiter Wolfgang Kessler stared at his bare feet in the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere in the chaos of the night attack, he'd lost his boots. The memory came back in fragments: the Soviet K-5 tank, the failed demolition, the desperate retreat through freezing mud. The tank had been sitting there like a metal mountain, immobile but dangerous. German doctrine demanded proper demolition procedures, calculated charges placed at precise structural points, professional execution with measurable results. But Kessler had panicked. The first charge had been too small, barely scratched the track. Standard procedure required withdrawal and regrouping. Instead, Kessler had gone back alone, against regulations, without backup support. Professional military procedure required team-based demolition operations for safety and effectiveness. The second charge was better placed, but poorly timed. He detonated it too close to his own position. The blast had thrown him into a shell crater filled with freezing water. When he'd crawled out, disoriented and half-deaf, his boots were gone. German military culture demanded perfection. Soldiers who lost equipment faced disciplinary action. Mistakes created shame and professional humiliation. The debriefing was brutal. German officers demanded detailed explanations for every deviation from standard procedure. Why had he returned alone? Why hadn't he secured his equipment properly? Each question highlighted the gap between military doctrine and battlefield reality. German training emphasized methodical procedures and proper equipment accountability. But combat was chaotic. Soldiers lost equipment. Plans required improvisation. Kessler's mistake was following regulations too closely. He should have declared the first charge successful and moved on. Professional military procedures demanded perfectionism that was often tactically irrelevant. 50 kilometers away, the officially dead Soviet scouts were learning the opposite lesson. They had abandoned all procedures and achieved more tactical success than properly equipped reconnaissance units. Their rejection of military professionalism had become their greatest advantage. Hauptmann Richter couldn't sleep. Every radio crackle made him flinch. Every transmission felt like a betrayal of position. The sophisticated communication equipment that had given German forces their tactical edge was becoming a liability. The phenomenon had a name now among forward units: radio psychosis. The paranoid belief that every electronic signal was being tracked, that sophisticated equipment was a death sentence. And the worst part was, it wasn't entirely paranoia. Soviet direction-finding equipment was crude but effective. German intelligence estimated that Red Army signal units could triangulate radio positions within 10 minutes of initial transmission. Artillery strikes followed within 15 minutes after that. German communications had become a death sentence for exposed positions. Maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary means. The company commander ordered. Absolutely necessary means imminent contact with superior enemy forces. Everything else will be handled with runners and flag signals. But radio silence created coordination problems that doctrine had never addressed. German tactical procedures assumed constant communication between units. Artillery support required radio coordination. Air support demanded radio guidance. Medical evacuation depended on radio contact with rear areas. Without radios, German forces were operating with medieval communication methods while fighting a modern war. German signal officers developed elaborate procedures to minimize radio exposure. Burst transmissions lasting less than 30 seconds. Frequency changes every 15 minutes. Code words replacing standard military terminology. None of it mattered. The Soviet scouts weren't using radios to locate German positions. They were watching German units with their eyes and marking positions by direct observation. All German radio security measures were protecting against a threat that had ceased to exist. The dead scouts had discovered something the Red Army Signal Corps never understood: electronic. Warfare was only effective against enemies who used electronics. Forces operating without radios were invisible to radio-based detection systems. German commanders requested additional signal security measures. They demanded improved radio discipline training. They implemented new communication protocols designed to prevent Soviet interception. Every measure addressed problems that no longer existed. The Soviet threat had evolved beyond German countermeasures by abandoning the technology that German countermeasures were designed to defeat. The Soviet ghosts were winning through technological regression. By becoming less sophisticated, they had become more dangerous. The KV tank sat in the road like a sleeping giant. For 48 hours, it had blocked the critical supply route to German forward positions. 48 hours of tactical insanity that violated every principle of armored warfare. German doctrine demanded mobility. Tank units advanced. They retreated. They never sat, stationary in exposed positions, absorbing punishment for 2 full days. But this Sovieted crew had apparently never read the manual. Hauptmann Weber stared through his field glasses at the motionless monster. The KV had taken direct hits from 50mm guns. Anti-tank charges had detonated against its armor. Nothing had stopped it. The first German attack came at dawn. 3 Panzer IIIs engaging from optimal range. Professional tank combat. The rounds bounced off KV-1 armor like pebbles thrown at a battleship. German tank commanders called for heavier weapons. An 88mm anti-aircraft gun was repositioned for direct fire. The legendary 88. The gun that could punch through any Soviet armor. This would end the embarrassment. The first shot was perfect. Direct hit to the rear armor. The KV should have erupted in flames. Instead, the turret rotated slowly toward the German position. The main gun elevated and returned fire. The 88mm crew dove for cover as high explosive shells bracketed their position. The tank wasn't dead, it was angry. German engineers approached with shaped charges, professional demolition techniques. They calculated explosive placement for maximum structural damage and positioned charges against the track assemblies. The explosions disabled the tank's mobility, but not its main gun. The KV-1 continued engaging German positions as a stationary fortress. More engineers, larger charges, professional escalation of force. They attached explosives directly to the turret ring, planning to separate the gun from the hull. The shaped charges blew a hole through the turret. German soldiers expected immediate surrender. Instead, the remaining crew members continued operating the main gun through the breach. 48 hours of continuous combat. The German supply route remained blocked. Professional tactics had failed to dislodge a single tank operated by soldiers who refused to follow professional withdrawal procedures. The KV-1 crew was finally eliminated when German soldiers dropped grenades through the hole in the turret. Not professional tank versus tank combat, not sophisticated anti-armor tactics, hand grenades thrown like medieval siege weapons. The lesson was unmistakable. Professional military procedures assumed rational decision-making by professional opponents. When opponents rejected rationality, professional procedures became ineffective. The tank crew had known they were going to die, known that staying in position was suicide, but they'd stayed anyway. Not because of orders, not because of duty, because abandoning their position meant German supplies would flow freely. German reinforcements would strengthen defensive lines. Their sacrifice had bought time for other Soviet units, had disrupted German logistics, had forced the Wehrmacht to commit resources to clearing a single roadblock. It was primitive thinking, brutal mathematics, one tank crew versus an entire supply chain. But primitive thinking was winning battles. Stalin personally reviewed the files spread across his desk. Operation Berezino, the most audacious deception in Soviet military history. A completely fictional Wehrmacht unit that had consumed German resources for months. "Comrade Sudoplatov," Stalin said quietly, "explain to me how the NKVD convinced German intelligence that Colonel Scherhorn's unit actually exists." The NKVD officer smiled with predatory satisfaction. "We created what the Germans wanted to believe, Comrade Stalin, a lost Wehrmacht battalion desperate for rescue, cut off behind Soviet lines, fighting heroically against impossible odds. The operation was brilliant in its simplicity. Soviet intelligence had fabricated an entire German unit, complete personnel records, authentic radio procedures, convincing backstories for every fictional soldier. But the masterstroke was psychological. The fake unit provided German intelligence with exactly the narrative they craved. Professional soldiers maintaining discipline under impossible conditions, heroes worthy of rescue operations. The Germans had promoted the fictional Colonel Scherhorn, awarded him the Ritterkreuz, sent supply drops, committed rescue resources for a unit that existed only in NKVD files and German wishful thinking. And the real intelligence value? Stalin asked. Immense, Comrade Stalin. Every German communication with the fictional unit provides insight into their operational procedures. Every supply drop reveals their logistics capabilities. Every rescue attempt exposes their tactical doctrine. The Germans were teaching the Soviets how to fight them because the NKVD had created a story that confirmed German assumptions about military professionalism. German military excellence had become German military vulnerability. Professional procedures that created tactical advantages could be exploited by opponents who understood professional procedures better than professionals did, or by opponents who rejected professional procedures entirely. The fictional Wehrmacht unit and the real Soviet scouts shared the same tactical approach. Both succeeded by rejecting standard military procedures. Both achieved victory through primitive methods that confuse sophisticated enemies. The Scherhorn Group provided fake professionalism that German analysts couldn't distinguish from reality. The Dead Men provided anti-professionalism that German doctrine couldn't analyze or counter. Stalin understood something his professional intelligence officers missed. Sometimes the most primitive approach defeats the most sophisticated system. The Red Army patrol found them at dawn. 7 Soviet soldiers in German equipment, moving through liberated territory like ghosts returning from the dead. Lieutenant Volkov raised his hands slowly, showing empty palms. His men formed a defensive line out of pure instinct. "Identify yourselves," called the Red Army sergeant. His PPSH submachine gun was ready, but not quite aimed. "Reconnaissance. Detachment 47B, Volkov replied, reporting for duty. The sergeant looked confused. He consulted a clipboard with unit rosters and casualty reports. 47B was declared KIA 6 weeks ago. No radio contact. Presumed dead. Mikhailov stepped forward, his weathered face showing something that might have been amusement. "We've been operating behind German lines, Sergeant. Complete radio silence. Deep reconnaissance." The younger soldier studied them more carefully. Their equipment was a mixture of Soviet and German gear. Their faces were lean and hard. They moved with the fluid coordination of men who had learned to trust each other completely. But according to Moscow's records, they were dead. 3 days later, Colonel Petrov received the most comprehensive reconnaissance report in divisional history. German positions mapped with surgical precision, supply routes documented, defensive capabilities assessed, tactical recommendations that would save hundreds of Soviet lives. The intelligence was invaluable. The tactical data was perfect. The operational insights were brilliant. But officially, the men who had gathered this intelligence had never existed. Red Army intelligence officers faced an administrative nightmare. How do you process intelligence collected by soldiers who are listed as dead? How do you incorporate reconnaissance data from officially non-existent sources? Processing their intelligence meant admitting that unauthorized reconnaissance was more effective than authorized operations. Using their information meant acknowledging that soldiers achieved better results by ignoring orders than by following them. The bureaucratic solution was elegant in its dishonesty. The reconnaissance intelligence would be incorporated into official reports. The source would be classified as field observations from advancing units. The dead scouts would remain officially dead. Their success would be credited to living soldiers who had followed proper procedures. The irony was complete. The most successful reconnaissance mission in the sector had been conducted by soldiers their own army had written off as casualties. Their tactical achievements would be attributed to other units, because officially they had never achieved anything. Volkov accepted reassignment to a different unit under a different name. His men were scattered across the front, their expertise valuable but their existence inconvenient. Their original records remained classified as killed in action. Their intelligence reports were filed without attribution. They had become tactically invisible to both armies. But the lesson wasn't lost on Soviet commanders who understood battlefield reality. Sometimes the most effective soldiers were those who ignored official procedures entirely. Sometimes military success required abandoning military professionalism. The Dead Scouts had proven that tactical excellence could emerge from rejecting tactical doctrine. Their unauthorized mission had achieved results that authorized missions couldn't duplicate. They had won by losing, succeeded by failing, survived by dying. The Red Army would learn from their example, though it would never officially acknowledge what they had learned. Future reconnaissance operations would quietly incorporate irregular procedures that resembled the dead men's methods. But those procedures would be carefully regulated, properly documented, and officially authorized. Professional armies always professionalized successful innovations, even when the innovations had succeeded by rejecting professionalism. The original Dead Scouts understood this paradox. Military bureaucracy would systematize their chaos and regularize their irregularity. Their tactical breakthrough would become just another entry in the field manual. They had achieved something that couldn't be repeated through repetition. Their success had come from abandoning success formulas entirely. Somewhere in German intelligence files, Colonel Scherhorn was still listed as a genuine hero, a professional soldier worthy of promotion and decoration, a commander whose fictional unit had become more real to German intelligence than actual Soviet forces operating 30 kilometers from their headquarters. And somewhere in Soviet personnel files, 6 of the most effective reconnaissance operatives of the Eastern Front were listed as casualties of poor radio discipline. Men who had proven that the greatest tactical advantage wasn't better equipment, stronger fortifications, or superior numbers. It was the freedom that came from having nothing left to lose. German military precision had built a system that could predict, intercept, and destroy professional opponents with extraordinary efficiency. The Wehrmacht had mastered the art of fighting soldiers. They had developed no art for fighting ghosts. The radio operators sat in their bunkers listening to silence. Supply officers filed reports about phantom attackers. Intelligence analysts studied maps trying to identify an enemy that had removed itself from every system designed to find it. They were searching with technology for men who had rejected technology, tracking with procedures men who had abandoned procedures, hunting with doctrine opponents who had thrown doctrine into a shell crater along with their identification tags. The silence was winning. In the end, the dead men discovered the ultimate military truth. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to stop trying to fight it professionally. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that officially never happened. Sometimes dead men accomplish more than living soldiers ever could. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.